Hello and welcome to Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for March 23rd. I'm your host, David Michalek, and every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we come together live on Facebook and YouTube to talk about credit. As a consumer credit expert with nearly a decade of experience, I've conducted well over 10,000 one-on-one credit coaching sessions. I'm looking forward to helping you understand and improve your credit. Joining us today is America's #1 credit expert, back again with us. He has 30 years experience in the credit industry, including years working for both FICO and Equifax. He's one of the very few credit experts that actually comes from the credit industry. So let's welcome John Ulzheimer. John, welcome.
David, thank you again for having me.
It's always great to have you here, and especially today because we've got a really big topic to cover today. In fact,
We got good stuff today.
A lot of good stuff today. Great stuff for consumers, great stuff for everybody in general. In fact, let me put it up on the screen here. This is what we're going to talk about today. Press release: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion support U.S. consumers with changes to medical collection debt reporting. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this one, but I wanted maybe have you start off with your take on this, and then we can dive into it a little bit and talk about how this is a good thing. I actually saw somebody make a comment for somebody going to CreditCon that, well, with all the good things, there's also some bad things. And I thought about it for a minute. I'm like, on the consumer end anyway, I can't think of any bad stuff, but maybe you have a different perspective. Who knows? There's Mike,
look,
2 weeks in a row with John.
For people who own credit repair companies, obviously, fewer derogatory items on a consumer's credit report makes their services less necessary, I guess is a good word to use. So I don't know if that was the perspective. Look,
that might have been. That's a fair statement. Yeah. Obviously,
that's
Credit
right.
Versio, we're indifferent to it. And the more things that benefit the client, the better. But I can see that point being made by people in the credit repair space.
I think there will continue to be plenty of ways for people to mess up their credit.
That is true.
So this one is, so if I have a very different perspective of this. So as you know, I'm not a consumer advocate, so I don't sit here and celebrate things like this, like the Braves just won the World Series. Oh yeah, they did just win the World Series. But I'm also not blind to the issue of medical debt. And so here's I think a very thoughtful perspective of this. So when you go out and use your credit card, you're choosing to use it. When you go and borrow money, so by choice. When you go apply for a mortgage loan and get into mortgage debt to buy a house, again, you're doing so by choice. When you, despite what you may hear on social media, student loan debt is also optional, right? So when you go borrow tens of thousands of dollars to get your gender studies degree, you have chosen to do so. You were not forced to do so. But no one chooses to get sick, right? So there's a pretty big difference between the normal extensions of credit and how they're all optional and medical debt, right? Yeah. No one chooses to get in a car crash. No one chooses to get meningitis. No one chose to get COVID, and no one chose to break their leg on the ball field, right? So I get it. It's a different type of obligation, albeit it is still an obligation. And so over the years, there has been what I call kind of credit report strangulation has been occurring. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, there are different influencing factors, lawsuits, the CFPB, they're just consumer pressure, just kind of changing of the times. There's been a change in the information that is on a consumer credit report. If we had been having this conversation 4 years ago, we would have been talking about how judgments and tax liens were in the
NCAP,
process
right?
of being, that's right, of being removed from credit
Yeah,
reports, where for decades before, no one batted an eye if they saw a judgment or a tax lien on a consumer credit report.
right.
But
Yeah,
now now they're like the California condor. They don't exist any longer on credit reports, right?
right.
They still exist, but they don't exist on credit reports.
Yeah,
Medical debt and medical collections specifically are now the new California condor, meaning that it became evident a couple of years ago that they were on the chopping block, and they were becoming an endangered species, and it was only a matter of time before they were essentially strangled out of credit reporting.
Do
So
you think do you think like the final step had to do with the CFPB's report that they came out with last month?
Oh, I can't even imagine that was not influential.
Yeah.
To suggest that wasn't influential is almost ignoring reality.
Well,
So I have.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but you can almost say the same
Yeah,
thing about the second phase of NCAP when judgments and tax liens got deleted, because weren't there a group of attorneys generals that were about to start taking some kind of an action against the bureaus? And it seems
yeah,
like the bureaus are good at preempting some of these maybe large. It's almost like they say, well, listen, we don't necessarily want the CFPB or attorney generals to decide for us what we need to do. So maybe we'll kind of take some kind of preemptive action and decide to make these kind of decisions on our own. I guess it's great for PR and everything else, but that's what it felt like to me when I read that report from the CFPB last month. And then lo and behold, this gets announced. I'm like, this sounds a lot like what happened with the second phase of NCAP, what you were mentioning, that they were no longer reporting tax liens and judgments.
yeah. The credit reporting industry is very good at reading the tea leaves
Yeah,
and turning a kind of a bad situation into a good situation. So
yeah,
NCAP, the reason NCAP, and for those who don't know what that is, it's the National Consumer Assistance Plan or Program. I don't remember what the
plan.
P.
Yeah, it's
Okay, and
plan.
if you Google that term, you can read the long list of things that the credit bureaus did as part of NCAP. Well, NCAP came around because of 31 states attorneys general taking action against the credit bureaus. And so
Right.
NCAP was a fantastic way of the credit bureaus kind of reshaping what they were going to be required to do into something that they chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was brilliant. The credit bureaus really came across looking like the good guy tuna fish company, and
Mm-hmm.
so to some extent that the medical collection issue is a really, if you think of kind of snapping together Legos, they're a really good fit
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
tail end of NCAP.
Well,
So medical.
I was going to say, maybe we should, just so everybody knows what we're talking about here. Maybe let's talk about, John, if you want to get started on what actually changed. What do consumers have to look forward to, if you're ready to talk about that?
Yeah, so two things changed. So this is actually kind of phase two of medical collections, of eliminating medical collections. The process of eliminating medical collections. So let's talk about what in the world we're talking about, right? So medical collections. So you go to a doctor, you get some sort of a service, you get a bill. You thought it was covered by the insurance policy, it wasn't, or they're arguing that it isn't. And then the doctor
Yeah.
wants to get paid, they're not getting paid. You can't afford to write a gigantic check for whatever procedure you had done, and they send it off to a collection agency. Or you're uninsured and you go have services provided, which is perfectly reasonable, of course. And there's a bill, you can't afford the bill, and they send it off to a debt collector. And so there are collection agencies that specialize in collecting defaulted medical debt.
Yeah.
And it is not uncommon to see a defaulted medical debt show up as a medical collection from a third-party debt collector on your credit report. Okay. So several years ago, the winds of change started blowing, and medical collections started to, so first off, credit scoring systems, FICO's credit scoring systems, the more contemporary versions of their credit scoring systems discount the effect of medical collections. Now, don't misunderstand the word discount to mean ignore. And I can't tell you how many interviews I did when this first started where I had to go back to the reporter and tell them, no. I didn't say ignore. I said discount. Discount, it means you get, if you go to a store and you get a discount on something, it doesn't mean you got it for free. It means you got a discount. So I wasn't very precise with my phrasing, and that was probably my fault. But so while in the more contemporary versions, medical collections that have a balance are still considered, they are discounted as to their impact. So that was really the first kind of baby step, if you will, of a major industry player changing how medical collections affected a consumer's credit report. All right, that was step one. So we'll call that medical debt 1.0. Now we have medical debt 2.0. Medical debt 2.0 is really more of a credit reporting industry process than it was a FICO or in credit scoring process. The credit reporting industry process, what they ended up doing is they did a couple of things. Number one is that they required all debt collectors that were going to furnish medical collections to the credit reporting agencies to include a code with the collection that clearly identified the collection as being a medical debt, which is important because it was now you're able to look at a credit report and distinguish between a medical collection versus a broken apartment lease collection versus a defaulted credit card account collection. So it's not hard at all for anybody, including a credit scoring system, to identify a medical collection on a credit report because of the credit reporting industry's requirement to code it accordingly. And that was part of NCAP. Now, why is that important? It's important because if you want to take kind of enterprise-wide actions towards a certain type of information on a credit report, it's easier to do so because all you have to do is look for one thing, the medical coding on a collection. So if you wanted to delete every single medical collection from every single credit report, you just write a script that essentially says delete every single collection with the code MD, and then boom, they're all gone. So that's really why they did it, is because they wanted to be able to clearly identify those medical collections for some sort of kind of augmented treatment down the road. That was part one. Part two of that was the collection, and it was an obligation placed on collection agencies, which was if you are assigned a medical collection from sort of a medical service provider like a doctor's office or a network of hospitals, that's fine, but you have to wait a half a year, 180 days, 6 months, after the date of the default of the medical debt before you can report it or furnish it to the credit reporting agencies. And the hypothesis behind that requirement to wait was because the insurance claim process is so broken that perhaps giving 6 months of time of kind of a delay, if you will, that perhaps the insurance process would work its way through, pay the doctor, and therefore they would then call back the collection, and then it would never be reported on a consumer's credit report. Another kind of tangential requirement of the credit reporting agency, you'll notice that there's requirements placed on a bunch of different parties in this whole kind of pizza, if you will, of medical collections. Another obligation of the credit bureaus was that if a medical collection was being paid or had been paid by the insurance provider, even after it was reported to the credit bureaus would have to delete it. So whenever I get questions from reporters, hey, how are medical collections treated? I'm like, man, you got to sit down because this is going to take a while because there's so many, it depends on this, it depends on that. So this latest announcement by the credit reporting agencies, which was just made a few days ago, even augments that process. So number one, that 6-month delay in furnishing medical collections has been bumped up to 12 months. So now if you do go into default with your doctor or some, like a hospital chain, it's going to be at least a year from the default before it ends up on a credit report. That gives the insurance process even longer to work its way through the system, and then hopefully the doctor's paid, and then there's no need for any collection to be included. The second thing that's important is paid medical collections will be deleted from now. Paid collections of all varieties are across the board ignored by contemporary generations of credit scoring systems. That's step one. That's great, but the credit report is still there. I mean, excuse me, the collection is still there. So even though it has a $0 balance and it's not affecting your credit score, if a lender has a policy that leads to some sort of punitive treatment of an applicant because of a paid collection of any variety, it was still there. Well, now paid medical collections are going to be removed from credit reports, whether they're paid by the insurance company or if they're paid by the consumer. Now, what we don't know yet, and I'm actually asking for clarification of this, the term that was missing from the credit reporting industry's press release was settled. So we don't know if we don't know if medical debt that is settled by the consumer with the debt collector, we don't know how those are going to be treated. We don't know if those are going to be deleted or if settled collections, medical collections, will still remain on a consumer's credit report.
Can you go into a little detail about what settled means for the viewers?
Sure. So let's say that I owe David $1,000. I can't pay David, and I negotiate with David to pay him $500, and David agrees to take $500, and then that's it. We call it even, and he doesn't try to collect the other $500.
Yeah.
I have just settled my debt with David for $500. And in credit reporting, there is a way to code an account on a credit report, either a collection or a trade line, that will indicate that the account, a settlement has been accepted on the account, which basically signals to the entire world that you failed at your obligation to pay the debt in full, but that the lender cut you some slack and accepted less than the full amount and has now basically called it a zero balance account.
Yeah.
So what we don't know yet, and I went to the trade association to ask for clarification on this, is how settled medical collections are going to be treated.
What I like about this, as opposed to, like, as you were talking about a second ago, that contemporary scoring models, VantageScore 3, 4, FICO 8, 9, 10, and 10T, that they ignore paid collections. But it kind of feels like maybe this is a move to removing a collection completely from the account, from the credit report. I think it has a lot of positive advantages, especially right now. Not that this is, it's a crazy real estate market, but one of the things that people ask the most, because the real estate is going crazy, is, well, if I pay off this collection, is it going to help my score? When you have to be very specific when you answer that question, like, well, what are you trying to get? If you're talking about, will your Vantage score look better? Possibly. But if we're talking about the older models, FICO models mandated by FHFA, then you're still in the same boat if you paid off the collection.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
Which is why removal is the bigger issue, because if it's removed, then the credit scoring system can't see it and can't consider it, versus just showing it as paid, where the older versions of the score. This is why I always keep talking about how FHFA is screwing home buyers, because their models are so outdated that they haven't gotten all these fantastic new options that these newer scoring systems have. But no one cares what John says, apparently. So, but yes, in these older versions, even a medical collection, even if it remains on the credit report, is going to be considered just like a credit card collection or a defaulted apartment lease collection.
Just to go off course a little bit, I seem to recall you and I talked about this. Gosh, it seems like it's been over a year. But there was a lot of attention for a short while there that it looked like FHFA was starting to consider more modern versions of FICO, and possibly even letting VantageScore into the allow them to compete with FICO. But I haven't
That's
heard
right.
anything about that ever since the real estate market really started to heat up. Have you heard
Yep.
anything, any progress on that at all?
Zero. And
Wow.
these are the same guys that want to take over credit reporting. I mean, they can't even get
Yeah.
credit scoring. They can't even get credit scoring right. Right? The
Right.
scores that are used, the scores. Look, don't take this as a criticism of FICO or any
Right.
of the credit bureaus, because this is not. This is squarely a criticism of FHFA. Just to make that, I don't want there to be any ambiguity in what I'm about to say. The score, every single year we keep talking about this, and every single year it just gets worse and worse. The scoring systems that are used for every single one of you watching, when you go out and apply for a mortgage loan, if you're getting a conventional mortgage, a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac mortgage, the scoring systems that are being used to consider you were built at the turn of the century. 22 years ago, people. They don't have any of this cool stuff that any of these newer scoring systems have. And you know why is that? Because in the mortgage environment, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac dictate what score version and what score brand has to be used in order for them to quote unquote buy or insure, whatever they do, one of the mortgages. So FICO 8, FICO 9, FICO 10, something other than FICO, none of that stuff is, none of that cool stuff that we're talking about is considered, because of this mandate for all your mortgage lenders and your mortgage brokers to use these ancient credit scoring systems. And it's I don't know what to say. I mean, people who have high credit scores will have higher credit scores under newer credit scoring systems.
Yeah.
People who have lousy credit scores could actually have higher credit scores under newer credit scoring systems because of this discount in medical collection treatment. Low-level delinquencies are not as don't penalize you as much in the newer scoring systems as they do in the older credit scoring systems. You know, trended data is considered now.
Trended data is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't. Again, I kind of get the idea that nobody cares, because these are really valid arguments. These aren't like opinionated arguments or political leaning arguments. These are valid arguments, almost like consumer advocate arguments. And we still keep talking about these ancient scoring systems.
Yeah, it's like going into, I don't know, Verizon and AT&T, and you're all excited about the new phone, and FHA is behind the counter like, hey, best we can do is a Motorola flip phone.
That's it, baby. We got a Razor phone in the back. We got a Razor phone in the back with your name on it. Give me a minute. I'm gonna come and get it for you.
Maybe older than that. Maybe the
iPhone Gen 1. Give me a minute.
Yeah, I think it would even be older than that. I thought about saying that, but like, no, I think in comparison, these old FICO models for mortgage are even older than that. We'd have to go back to like the Motorola StarTAC or a Nextel phone if we want to be on the same time level. All right, so we got let's see, a couple of questions here.
Yep.
Yeah, Derek saying good evening. Also got a comment about receiving some alerts from Experian. Okay, good luck to you there. Prince Charles is back in the house. Welcome, Prince Charles. Jerry from Flint, Michigan. And Mike with the first question so far. With technology becoming so advanced, are disputes being decided by computers talking with each other rather having an actual person look at the disputes? This sounds a little bit like the conversation that you and I and Steve Rager had when we were talking about the Metro 2 dispute letter. So,
yeah. So just to be clear, the technology used to facilitate the consumer dispute process hasn't changed in a long time. I mean, eOscar has been around for decades. The forms that are used for processing consumer disputes are the same forms that I used in 1991. So they're not new. They're just automated versus on a piece of paper, on a tablet where you'd write it and rip it off and fax it to somebody. Now they're just electronic. But so even though the tech has become so advanced, really the process hasn't changed much, right? So the consumer contacts the credit bureau, they file a dispute. The credit bureau kind of homogenizes the dispute onto a dispute form called an ACDV. They fire off the ACDV to the furnisher of the information through a system called eOscar, which is basically just a communication protocol. The furnisher logs into their eOscar account and they see whatever pending disputes are sitting there. And their obligation is to perform a reasonable investigation into the consumer's dispute and respond in a timely manner so that the credit reporting agencies can update their data accordingly and then respond to the consumer with an updated copy of their credit report. These are all FCRA obligations. So that hasn't changed in a really long time. The only thing that's changed is that the tech has made it more efficient. And now instead of it taking, so if you read the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the dispute process has between 30 and 45 days to occur, right? It doesn't take anywhere near 30 to 45 days. Most disputes are done within less than 2 weeks, and some are done within a couple of days, depending on the nature of the dispute. So the tech has become way more advanced, and certainly the process is more efficient and doesn't take quite as long. But there still are human beings that sit there at terminals and process these dispute forms. Some of these people are in different countries. Some of these people are in the United States, but nonetheless, a human being is still causing the transfer of those forms to occur between the credit bureaus and their data furnishers.
Yep. All right. Great question, Mike. As always. Angel, thank you for the helpful information. You're most welcome. What if the company refuses to negotiate? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Angel. I don't know what kind of negotiating you are referring to. If you want to maybe go into more detail, might be able to help you out with that. And Margaret Gray says hello. So John, going back to this, the big change in medical collections. The first date that I recall is sometime July this year. They're going to start implementing some of it. Do we have any details yet as to what they're going to do and when?
Yeah, so July 1st, the paid medical collections are gone. They're going to be removed from consumer credit reports. That's also when the extension of the waiting period is going to go from 6 months to a year. And then sometime in the beginning of next year, the bureaus are also going to purge medical collections that have an original balance of less than $500. So that's actually
and that's
a big deal,
a big one too.
That is a big one. So I know some clever collection agencies, and I don't know if they're going to tack on enough fees that it's $510 or not. But nonetheless, if it does, and the credit scoring systems already ignore low dollar collections, but I think those low dollar collections are less than $100, so they're really, really small.
Yeah.
But this is important to talk about. We talk about this stuff and we talk about it, and it sounds fantastic for the consumer, and it's just so fantastic. And oh my gosh, roses and champagne and blah blah blah. let me ask you a question. And trust me, no one in the media is going to talk about this because they don't have an analytics background, right? They're just trying to cram out content. So we have removed judgments from credit reports. We've removed liens from credit reports. We are now removing medical collections. By and large, we're removing medical collections from credit reports. So 10 years ago, let's say you had this kind of universe of derogatory information that could go on a credit report, and that a credit scoring system could consider differently, right? Because not all derogatory entries are considered the same way. Some of them they're considered different things. A collection isn't considered the same way as a charge-off, and a charge-off's cannot consider the same way as a bankruptcy. So they're all their own unique little animal. They're all considered differently. But now we have, kind of think of it as a funnel. We have fewer derogatory entries on credit reports. And who knows, maybe next year we're going to talk about, wow, repos are not on credit reports any longer. Foreclosures aren't on credit reports any longer. So this is what I call data strangulation, is that you're restricting furnishers from providing this information. You're restricting the credit bureaus from going out and getting it like what they would do with public records. All right. So you have all these credit scoring models that are designed to predict the likelihood of you going delinquent on any obligation in the next 2 years. That has not changed. And anyone who is under the delusion that credit scoring models are going to go away they're crazy, because they're not. So let me ask you this. What do you think happens to the remaining derogatory information? So things like charge-offs and non-medical collections, repos, foreclosures, settlements, defaulted student loans, late payments, anything, settlements on trade lines, anything that is considered derogatory, but doesn't fall into the category of the stuff that's been removed. What do you think happens to that information with respect to credit scoring systems? I'm wondering if any of our viewers knows what happens with that information when you keep removing other information that's derogatory.
I have my response, but let's see if somebody wants to chime in. I'm waiting for Mike's probably doing this right now.
Oh no, Smothers is typing as fast as he's like that cat meme where the cat's just hammering. He's going to pull a muscle. Mike, don't pull a muscle, but yes.
That's okay. We'll give you a second here while I read through a couple other of the comments here. Let's see. So we'll get to that in just a second. Angel, I see your posts here. So yeah, it's not. I mean the medical. Let me just. Well, let's finish up with what John you were talking about. Then we'll get to Angel here in a second.
Okay.
My thoughts, just in case Mike is just waiting for us to respond, is I think those things are going to be weighted heavier.
That's exactly right. They're going to fill the void, right? That's like water. Water is eventually going to win, and it's going to fill the void. If you keep removing derogatory entries, credit scoring systems are going to more heavily weigh the stuff that remains, which means, so if you removed, let me give you kind of an easy scenario to understand for the people who don't have like a math or an analytics background. Let's just say that next year, for some reason, the credit reporting agencies are required to delete all negative entries other than a 30-day delinquency. So the only bad thing that can ever appear on a credit report ever again is a 30-day delinquency. What do you think is going to happen to a consumer's credit score when a 30-day delinquency hits their credit report?
We're going to see a 30-day delinquency that can have a 200-point effect on your score, exactly, or somewhere in that neighborhood.
It's going to be the Niagara Falls of credit score movement. The more stuff you remove from a credit report, all you're doing is forcing the credit scoring system to more heavily weigh other things that remain. And no one is talking about that. So what's happening is all these people who have tax liens and judgments and medical collections are celebrating, yay! But all these people who do not, but have charge-offs and foreclosures and repos and late payments, their scores are going to be lower, because the scoring system is going to simply shift gears and move away from considering the stuff that's not there to over considering the stuff that remains. And I guarantee you, no one is going to talk about that, because we're just talking about this from this is fantastic from a consumer advocacy perspective, yay! But no one kind of digs into the granularity. And the more bad stuff that is removed, the more impactful the bad stuff that remains is going to be. Because look, if you think of the old FICO pie chart, the 35, 30, 15, 10, 10, that 35 hasn't changed. It's just there's less stuff to go on top of that slice of pizza that makes up that 35% slice. So in my analogy of only being 30 days, the 30-day delinquency remaining, I know that's kind of a silly example, but I just wanted to illustrate just how that's kind of the data strangulation slippery slope, is the more crap you have removed, the more the other stuff has to sit, which means things like utilization. Utilization is going to become more problematic. Inquiries, are we seriously going to talk about inquiries again? Inquiries are going to become more problematic. Time and file, the age-related metrics are going to be more problematic. So things like, wait a minute, why did my credit score just go down so much? Oh, you have an inquiry. I thought inquiries don't really count that much. Well, the scoring system has to grab onto something because we can't look at your tax liens anymore
Yeah.
because all that stuff is gone.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, what is the whole purpose of a credit report in a score? It's assessment of risk.
That's right.
If lenders want to know how responsible, how likely you are to be a good risk, and if they don't have this, they got to weigh heavier some other stuff. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
It's the connect. You know what it is? It's the kinetic chain of credit reporting and credit scoring. It's like if you keep taking away this stuff, this other stuff is going to increase in its value because it has to. It has to. You still have to score between 300 to 850. You still have to earn a certain number of points for certain things. You still have to be penalized a certain number of points for things. And if you keep removing information that was used in older versions of the scoring systems, then you have to increase the value or the impact of other things that you would think are seemingly less problematic, but now have become more problematic because you're forcing them to be more problematic. So this may sound fantastic. This is one of those things that's like, what are the rednecks' last words? Hey, y'all, watch this. It's like you don't think about what happens after you say, hey, y'all, watch this. It's fantastic to be able to tell everybody that we've removed all these bad things from credit reports, but really now dig down into the cornflakes and tell me, what does this really mean other than just some cosmetic removals for some small percentage of consumers who have paid medical collections on their credit reports?
Yeah. All right. So let's get into, well, we were just right on this subject talking about how is this going to branch out into other aspects of a credit report and score. So Christopher asked, how hurtful are high usage balances on small credit card limit accounts as far as negative points? Sorry, new to repairing our credit. So a few questions. Well, repairing credit, not repairing credit. This is something that's really important to know about credit card utilization.
Yeah, so you don't need to apologize for your question. That's a fantastic question. And I love talking about this. And if you think you're the only one who doesn't know the answer to this question, sir, then welcome to the club. There are a lot of people. So obviously, one of the important metrics in credit scoring systems is the balance to limit ratios on your credit card accounts. And the formal term for that is called revolving utilization. The informal term is credit utilization, the balance to limit ratio, debt to limit ratio. It's kind of all the same thing, but the formal term is revolving utilization. It's the relationship between the balances on your credit cards and the credit limits on your credit cards as they appear on your credit reports. And so I actually just shot a video about this for another client this morning in my car. Almost got in a wreck. The utilization ratio is calculated two ways. Number one, in aggregate. So all of your credit cards, the limits, and then all of your credit cards with balances, and then the aggregate or the sum of those two values, the balances divided by the limits. If you have, for example, $1,000 of credit card balances and $2,000 of credit limits, your utilization is 50% because 1,000 divided by 2,000 is 0.5. You multiply that by 100 and you get 50%. You want that ratio to be as low as possible. FICO's credit scoring systems, the people who have the highest scores in this country, the high flyers or high achievers, as FICO calls them, have an average utilization of 7%. 7, not 7T, 7. That's a pretty low amount. And you don't need to have that all the time. But look, if you're about to go apply for a mortgage, you want that ratio to be as low as possible. The ratio is also calculated on a line item by line item basis. That's less impactful than the aggregate. So one of the strategies, Christopher, that you may see online, which I caution anybody to take advice from, the TikTok credit expert, but whatever. One of the pieces of advice that I see a lot out there is, spread your balances across a bunch of credit cards, because then no single credit card is going to have a really high utilization ratio. That is true. That mathematically, that is an accurate statement, but it's definitely not helpful. One of the other metrics in credit scoring systems that people tend to ignore, unfortunately, is the number of accounts with balances. And so that David and I talked about that pie and the kind of the slices of the pie and how important they are. And the payment history slice is 35%. Well, the debt slice is 30%. So it's a close second to whether or not you're making your payments on time. So and a lot of people think that utilization is that 30%. And so utilization counts for 30% of the points in your score. That's incorrect. That category actually has several debt-related metrics, including utilization. But utilization isn't worth 30% of the points in your score. That's just flat out wrong. It's on FICO's website if you don't believe me. You can find it really easily. One of the metrics in that category is the number of accounts with balances. So when you start spreading credit card balances across multiple cards to avoid a spike of utilization on any one of them, you may lower the negative impact of one metric, but increase the negative impact of another, because now you have tons of credit cards with balances where before you did not. So the net of your actions may actually work against you, or at the very least dilute the value that you thought you were getting because you spread the balances. Look, we're talking about silly ways to deal with this issue. The proper way to deal with this is to lower your credit card balances and to eliminate balances and to limit your usage to maybe one or two credit cards, and then leave the other ones open to help insulate you from utilization spikes, and then be done with it. So anyway, that's kind of utilization in a nutshell.
Yeah, Christopher, just to give my 2 cents on that, as a guy that's almost exclusively worked with people in the credit restoration side of their credit life cycle. When I would get those phone calls asking, hey, why did my score drop 50, 80 points? Because I got a couple things deleted. What happened? It's about 80 to 90% of the time, the first thing I'm going to look at is their credit card utilization, their revolving utilization. And what is usually the culprit are people who are coming back into the credit market. They've got low limit credit cards. They got that $200 or $300 secured card. That's how they're getting started. They have a great note on the town with their spouse, and they charge it all the way up to, they max it out. They don't really realize what they've done. It's the only credit card that they've got, and they get a nice little surprise when it comes to the drop in the credit score. So just make sure that you're really paying attention when you're starting to use credit cards again, if you're new to them or you're just getting back into using credit. So make sure you go into Credit Versio's, like on our homepage. There's a credit coaching section where John did a ton of videos, a ton of articles about how to use credit, and also there's the credit coaching videos inside your Credit Versio account. Talks about this stuff. So you're walking around with a loaded weapon. You want to make sure you know how to use it when we're talking about credit cards. Okay, and also just to expand on that, Christopher, you said let me just bring this up. If I paid those down to 5% across the board, how much can it jump and how long will that take? Is some balance better than no balance? Well, John, I'll let you just kind of wrap up what we were talking about with utilization with the answer to that one.
Yeah, if you have the ability, it kind of sounds like David. Do you mind throwing that back up there? If there's a way you can do that. Yeah. So Christopher, look, if you have the capability or the capacity to pay down all of your credit cards to 5% utilization across the board, can I maybe suggest a different strategy and maybe pay down or pay off a lot of them and then just leave a lower number of cards with balances and then be done with it? I think that's... Now, look, I don't know your situation. I don't know what else you have on your credit reports, and I can't give you individual credit improvement advice here. That's not what I do. But generally speaking, having fewer credit cards with balances versus more credit cards with balances is where you want to be. First off, it's cheaper, right? If you leave balances on credit cards, the average interest rate on a credit card is around 17%, I think. And if you have retail store cards, then they're into the 20% range, and that's pretty expensive. So I don't know, from a financial perspective, I would want to eliminate as much of that debt as possible, because then it's not interest accruing any longer. And then from a scoring perspective, obviously you'd like to have as few accounts with balances as possible. So if you're able to get them down to 5%, that's really, I mean, you're kind of entering the nuisance balance arena at that point, like what you would typically see during the Christmas season on retail store cards, because people think they have to use their Gap card at the Gap and their Macy's card at Macy's and their whatever card at whatever, and they don't realize they can use their Amex at all of them and then be done with it. So they end up with these what I call nuisance balances all over their credit reports, and then they don't understand why their scores went down in January when the creditors furnished all that information to the bureaus. So I would, you know, from my perspective, I like using the kind of the white hat strategy and just pay as much of it off as you possibly can, and just start using maybe one or two cards and then be happy with it and move on.
Yeah, a lot of times, Christopher, I've seen this over years and years, especially if you're getting information from the, like John said, like the TikTok crowd, or the people on YouTube who, you know, probably well-intentioned but really don't necessarily know what they're talking about. There's only so much you can do to game the system. And really, just like what John said, the white hat approach is, in fact, I'll just kind of tie in Angel's question to this, because it really applies. Does it hurt your score to have cards with zero balances? You know, I have five credit cards. Most of the time, I have zero balances on all of them. I don't revolve a debt from 1 month unless something gets thrown on there, like maybe a couple hours before the end of the statement date, and it gets caught and it reports to the bureaus. But it's always less than 1%. Most of my utilization is usually 1% if it's anything at all. So, and John, I don't suspect you're much of a revolver either.
Yeah, no, I try to practice what I preach, and I preach avoiding credit card interest because it's really expensive, and you know, paying your balances in full every month, and you don't have to worry about credit card debt or APRs because they become irrelevant at that point. But look, I not everybody's in my situation, so I understand that. So to the extent that you can keep those balances as low as possible, localize them to cards that have the lowest interest rates as you possibly can. There's a ton of credit cards out there that will give you 0% APR for 6 months to a year and a half as an intro APR for balance transfers. You may have to pay a small balance transfer fee, but if you compare that fee relative to the amount that you're going to save by not paying any interest while you're trying to get out of credit card debt, it absolutely the math works in your favor. So I don't criticize anybody for having credit card debt. I get it, but it's an important wealth building strategy for you to get out of it, so you can start putting that extra money every single month where you want it to go versus where you know it has to go, which is your credit card issuer.
All right, so we're coming down to the end here, John. I think I just saw one question from Prince Charles up at the top we didn't get to. Any new information about the time bankruptcy will remain on the credit report?
No, that's the one thing. I'm actually I got to be honest with you, Prince. I'm actually pretty surprised about that, to be really honest with you. Given the kind of momentum against the negative information, and A, how long it's reported, and B, whether or not it can be reported, I'm really, really surprised that consumer bankruptcies haven't also been kind of swept up in that data strangulation problem. But no, as of today, as of our discussion today, it's still 7 to 10 years for the filings. The actual public record of the filing on your credit report has not changed.
You know, John, I wonder.
I'm sorry,
no, go
David.
ahead.
There's one. I want to make a point. Even though you don't have a judgment on your credit report, or a tax lien on your credit report, or a medical collection on your credit report, you still have all that stuff, right? It's not like it goes into some black hole or some sort of a vacuum and then it's gone. You still have that stuff. The minute the credit bureaus stopped maintaining tax liens and judgments, LexisNexis introduced a new product called View, which was a report that included tax liens and judgments. So really, one product popped up out of nowhere to kind of fill the void where another product stopped reporting it. So you still have a tax lien, you still have a judgment, you still got to deal with the trouble of dealing with those things. If you have a medical collection, you still have a medical collection. It's just not on a credit report. So I would not be very surprised if all of the really large debt collectors kind of got together and said, you know what, this is an attack on our industry. And it is. It's an attack on their industry. No one likes debt collectors except for the people who own or work for debt collectors. And if I were a debt collector and I collected medical debt, I would do exactly what the merchants did 100 years ago, which was, you know what, let's start sharing information with each other and create our own little database and create our own little consumer report. And then people can come to us and start buying it as a supplement to a garden variety credit report. It's definitely something that if I were in a position of power with a large debt collector that is going to lose a gajillion dollars because of this, especially if they collect medical debt, I would absolutely start considering creating my own little credit bureau and giving clients access to my information.
That wouldn't surprise me at all, John. You remember when NCAP, the second phase of NCAP passed, and I remember it just like that because I was in the business, and I remember 1 month you got tax liens and judgments on credit reports, and the next month you didn't. And you know what name we started hearing more and more? Like it wasn't even something that the majority of the people knew about, but I would say it didn't take more than a couple of months where LexisNexis was on the lips of everybody because that's where it went. So if you think, so right, just like John said, just because it's not on the credit report doesn't mean it's not there anymore. Because what's that underwriter going to do when they want to find out what's what? Is they're going to look at your credit report and they're going over to Lexis /SageStream to see what else they're going to find.
And everyone watching, I want y'all to put this. I want you to take off whatever hat you're currently wearing and plop your butt into the seat of a lender. And also now pretend like it's your money. Wouldn't you want to see that stuff? If someone comes and applies for credit with you, don't you want to see if they have a tax lien? Don't you want to see if they have a judgment? Don't you want to see if they have a medical collection? Right? I mean, even though they didn't choose to get into that debt, they did. They're in it. So, I mean, wouldn't you want to see that if you're lending somebody your money? So I think if you look at it from that perspective, you would find very, very few consumers who would say, no, I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm happy lending my money to people who have tax liens and judgments. I'm perfectly fine doing that, and I don't really care about it. I think that's bullshit. I think lenders still want to see that information, and I think that as long as these companies kind of with Lexis and the View product, it's now commonly included in their mortgage tri-merges as a LexisNexis View feed. And really all it's doing is it's supplementing the information that the credit bureaus, the traditional credit bureaus, because LexisNexis is a credit bureau, the traditional credit bureaus removed, so Lexis just popped up and created a product to fill the void. So I'm not in a position of power in the collection agency world, but I'd be really, really surprised if someone who isn't sitting there tonight thinking, is this an opportunity? Because it might be an opportunity.
Yeah, good point. All right, so we're coming up to our time limit today. I realize there's a couple of questions that are in here. I know, Christopher, you had one about student loan debt, and Anaya, I believe, sorry if I mispronounced your name. I will swing back around in the next 24 hours. I will answer those myself. Thank you so much for joining John and me today. Appreciate it. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this on a replay, feel free to post your questions, and I will be happy to answer them for you. John, thank you very much again for joining me today. Glad we got a chance to get a very comprehensive view of what's taking place with medical collections, and we'll be at it again in another couple of weeks.
All right. Thank you for having me, David. Y'all have a good night.
Take care. Thanks.